Now, Cedric has already given you a taste of what's coming. We have lots to talk about, and we don't have much time. So to start off, I'd like to ask Justine Cassell and Laurence Devillers to come up. Justine Cassell is from the Carnegie Mellon University. Hello, Justine. Human-Computer Interaction Institute, and Laurence is from the Sorbonne and has been working on the interactions between machines and the emotional side of things. Justine and Laurence have 15 minutes so that we can understand human intelligence. That's your challenge. Justine, from a historical point of view, can we say whether the subject that we're discussing today is in any way new?
We've been discussing this subject for hundreds of years. The history of artificial intelligence dates back. We talked about virtual agents which were created inside different types of machines. But I'd like to talk about more recent history, because at the beginning of the 1950s, there were two types of meetings which had a real influence on the way we perceive artificial intelligence today. There was, first of all, a group of mathematicians who met at Dartmouth College, including Marvin Minsky. And some consider that he is one of the researchers who really launched the artificial intelligence, John McCarthy, Claude Shannon, and Herb Simon. At approximately the same time, other meetings were held in New York, bringing together people coming from different disciplines. We had very famous anthropologist Margaret Mead and her friend Gregory Bateson, a psychologist, and mathematicians too participated in this meeting. In the first group, they only talked about mathematics and how is it possible to develop a machine which could think the way we think. So it was really a cognitive approach. Whereas in New York, maybe it was because it was held in New York, the group had other kinds of discussions. They talked about digital interpretation of mind, anthropology, and how can computers learn how to learn. What about ethics and fundamental science? And what is the difference between communicative behavior and communication? So these were the titles of the discussions, because these titles really anticipated the discussions that we're having today. What was done in New York, unfortunately, was set aside, and the mathematicians pushed their own model, the way they think, we think. And it's only years later that we're coming back to the issues of mind, of interaction, and culture.
Donc, à l'heure actuelle, on crée des machines.
Yes, well, to go on with this, we are creating machines nowadays that can actually think, can take decisions. We're also teaching them how they have the capacity to learn, sometimes to learn alone, sometimes to learn with humans. And also are capable of acting and interacting verbally with humans. They can detect emotions. They can show empathy. This is revolutionizing society, but also industry, transports, and everything. But what are we creating? We are creating machines that are simulating some of our behavior and only part of our intelligence, which is reproduced by the machines. It would be narcissistic to see things differently. Let's come back to human beings. What do we really know about human beings? Do we know that we have organs that are autonomous? Do we know what percentage is really conscious to us? There's a lot that's in our unconscious being. How and what is the real knowledge that we have? What is the substrate of our thinking? So we have machines that don't have emotions, do not have desires. You should read Amasio, who speaks of the body very clearly and the brain. And in fact, we're simulating something which would just describe the functioning of the brain, but not the way the body works or thinks. The machines are different from us. They're learning without understanding. They have no common sense. They may have some autonomy, it's relative, but they don't really have that desire to live, as Spinoza has described so well.
Si ces machines sont...
Well, if these machines are incarnate, wouldn't it really be interesting to see how they can interact intelligently with others? Yes, it's the interaction that's interesting and the most important part. Human beings, in fact, naturally project onto these autonomous machines and project human capacities. You don't need a machine that loves you. You've got a machine like a vacuum cleaner that can be completely autonomous. But with these other machines, there's a certain form of attachment. The projection, of course, is perfectly normal with human beings because we live in interaction with other human beings. But it also prevents us from learning. And what is important is to learn. For example, Sophia Antomedi said that she was a robot and could understand everything. It was just fooling us. It's a script. There's a script behind that telling us what she's telling us. It just means that she's a dummy. She can, in fact, synthesize certain data. So I think we should stop putting all these sort of biases. And social robots that wish to establish ties with us, that want to help us, perhaps help elderly people. Well, we've got to think about the question of ethics. You've got to think about the attachment and also the fact that you're living in an intimate area with the machine. And this concerns long-term issues. These are new areas of research that we've got to work on with our general public and with different disciplines.
I totally agree. And I think it's not a coincidence that we're here today launching the day with a discussion on human intelligence. Because artificial intelligence can be used as a mirror. Artificial intelligence reflects ourselves. It's a kind of mirror. And if we look at artificial intelligence, if we look at robots, and if we think about who we are, what we become, we can ask ourselves that we're happy with what we see. And for quite a long time, we've been talking about autonomy as the aim in terms of artificial intelligence. Now, is it our objective because it corresponds to us? As Laurence said, we hardly know anything about ourselves. We are not autonomous. When we look at ourselves, we think we are autonomous, but in fact, we are intrinsically interdependent. And we really have to count on one another. We exist because we're part of networks, professional networks and personal networks. And without these networks, we will not feel really alive. So we should not create. So we have to create interdependent agents, should we?
I think the answer to your question is great, but how do we proceed? What do we do so that we find these sort of machines that are working for human beings and for their service? Well, we talked about dystopia and utopia. Let's talk about dystopia. For increasingly, we see that in other cultures, people see these differently. Look at Japan. For the time being, there is a company which you can see an earl, which is an incarnate. It's a hologram. You've got a little blue figure. I call her the little fairy. And in fact, it responds to what you read. It's to be reassured so that you're not alone. This little creature, in fact, responds to that primary requirements. And when you go to work, it continues to send you messages. So this is an advertisement that we see in Japan. These are little objects, well, Siri is something that you used. Megalom is also on its way. But then gradually we will give it a face. Will we need other human beings soon? That's a question which I think is real. And then the other thing, the vocal servers, talking to the dead, using her technology for this. Now, are we going to be using holograms to talk to the dead, to those who are no longer there? Is that what we're going to use with these holograms? It's not to scare you, but I think you should think about these things. So be aware that that sort of thing could occur. And we're trying to project onto our societies, the understanding of these issues. And that's what we should all be doing.
Absolutely. But at the same time, I think that I'm slightly more optimistic than you, Laurence. If you take a look at the picture on the right, this is a picture of an experience I conducted with my students. We created what we call a virtual child using image. And this virtual child was developed in order to help children learn how to read and write. And we actually found out that typical children and autistic children or children with Asperger's syndrome really benefited from the presence of this virtual child. Autistic children were more social, had a more social behavior, engaged more with a virtual child, more than with their own parents. Now that could scare you because there's no way we're going to give away our children. We don't want them to spend all the time with virtual children. But there is a kind of a transfer, and the virtual child should teach children what to do. This was the technological benefit. It was this transfer. Children using this technology, programming this technology, ended up more social and had a different behavior with other children. And I think that could happen to all of us. We can be scared to lose knowing how to love, but isn't it important to keep loving, knowing how to love another, knowing that interdependence is important? We have to be interdependent. We have to depend on somebody else, and somebody else has to depend on us. And I think these virtual agents have a role to play.
En un mot de conclusion, peut-être.
Just to sum up, let's go on to the way in which this technology can affect society. Well, I shall try to sum up very briefly. We need, obviously, to demystify what we understand by artificial intelligence. We have to train. Training is indispensable. Make sure that human values are the focal point. We also have to make sure that we shouldn't have blind faith in machines. People who have started working on issues, there are lots of reports on the ethical or moral side of machines. And I think also in her data collection, and we have to make sure that ethics and moral issues, code of ethics, also for the designers, emancipation and information sharing with users. We could have open laboratories. Empowerment is important. Empowerment for everybody so that we can all understand the systems. Also understand questions of transparency, loyalty, non-discrimination of these systems. We've also got to have a greater mix in the people who are actually programming and working. And I also would like to talk about co-evolution between man and the machine. This is what we've just talked about. Machines are there to help human beings. Human beings will change some of their behaviors. Make sure that this is for the well-being of man and the world. And I'd like to conclude on an optimistic note. We're going through a very exciting period. Let's try and find good things out of this, ways of reaching out, solidarity, sharing. It's a good way of sharing. That's beautiful.
Yes, that sounds great. I'm ready. Cedric said a few minutes ago that we are we all have to be involved. And indeed, it is the case. We should not relinquish our responsibility. We have to take part in the future of technology and artificial intelligence. If, robots can destroy jobs. If you ask of robots what they do best, that is collaborate with humans, this is what you'll get. And that is the frontier of artificial intelligence. We're not talking about intelligence which will replace us. We're talking about intelligence to share the world. And it's only if we decide to get involved and decide the world we want in the future, that's the conditions. We will build this collective and artificial world.